Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. Welcome back once again to the briefing room. And actually, it's double duty today, folks. This is also material for future proof. For those of you who don't know, we have the world's first made-for-TV webinar series. That's exactly right. Your host here, Eric Kavanagh. So we're going to do the briefing room with Looker, of course, now part of the Google family. Supply and demand, designing the modern data stack. And folks, I'm so excited to be with two experts in the room today. Bruno Aziza is now, of course, over at Google, and Joel McKelvey is a really, really savvy character. This guy is, he was blowing my mind in our first call when we did the content call for this webinar. So I'm very much looking forward to talking about the modern data stack. Now, for those of you who've been around for a while, you know that it's been kind of a long journey to get here. So let's just take a look at where we've been. So what's old, right? Data warehousing. This has been around since the late 1980s, really a long, long time, and it's still very prominent today. We saw, of course, with the IPO of Snowflake, a lot of eyebrows raised. A lot of people got pretty excited about that. And really, in a way, it's kind of a statement on the previous movement, which was, of course, Hadoop. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But what's old is new again in many ways, and that's going to be the theme for my presentation. So if you think about data warehousing and how we got here, well, really the data warehouse of old was designed around a whole set of constraints that kind of don't exist anymore. Thin pipes, slow processors, expensive storage, static schema, for example. This is the old way of doing things. In the old world of data warehousing, you really had to know which questions your analysts were going to ask. And you built your schema around that for performance, right? It's always about performance, getting the insight to the right people at the right time, to help them understand what is going on with the business. And of course, we have to remember in the early days of data warehousing, the whole reason why we did all this is because you couldn't really query those operational systems. So your enterprise resource planning systems, your customer relationship management systems, you couldn't really query those things. In fact, if you think back not that long ago, around 2005 or 2006, I remember using a CRM solution for a very large media company, and it was brutal. It was just so painful. It was incredibly slow. In fact, it was so slow that guess what? Nobody used it. Or maybe one or two people would use it religiously and nobody else did. That's not a very good solution for the modern world, is it? So in the modern data stack, we need to kind of look beyond all that. And so I like this whole metaphor of the warehouse. Data warehousing, of course, we understand what that is. You pull data from the operational systems. You build OLAP cubes on top of all that for performance. That's how you used to get your analysis. Well, look at the modern warehouses of today at Amazon. Lights out. If you haven't heard this term, a lights out warehouse refers to the fact that they don't need lights in there because it's all robots doing the work. And so you have these robots, and that really is a tremendous innovation that came out of Amazon. It's one of the reasons why they're such a powerful company these days. But if you look at all these robots, they just zip around and do their thing all day long. So what's the key here? Automation. Automation is the key to the modern data stack, whether that's automating pulling the data in, automating cleaning the data, cleansing the data. We talk about data pipelines these days, which is a lot more robust than ETL. Remember ETL? Extract, transform, load. Well, that's what you did to get the data into the warehouse. In the old days, it's still being done today. When I say the old days, there's a very long spectrum of innovation that we can now canvas to know where we came from, where we are, and where we're going. And I can tell you that automation is the key across the board. So we have things like dynamic data pipelines. This is one of the coolest things I've come across, using declarative programming to dynamically provision data pipelines and then fix them or alter things when there's data drift, for example. So just about every part of the process can now be automated, and that's what you're going to find in the modern data stack, is a heavily automated environment that is really doing what the business needs it to do when the business needs it to do that. So what else have we learned? There's our friend Elon Musk, who is talking about a forward thinker. This guy's amazing. But data has gravity, so we've learned this. And I can tell you that this particular webinar series, the Briefing Room, we're in year 11 of the Briefing Room. My other show is DM Radio. We're in year 13 of DM Radio. And I remember way back in 2008 and 2009, interviewing folks in this industry, and we talked all about ETL, moving data around, and I thought to myself, this madness has to stop. We can't keep picking data up, forklifting it over here, picking it up, forklifting it back over there. Why? There are lots of reasons why. One, it's expensive to move data. Two, it's very error prone. All kinds of things can happen when you're moving large amounts of data that you didn't expect. Fields getting truncated, for example. Instead of Los Angeles, it's Los Ang or something like that. This happens when you move data. There are delimiters you didn't know about. There are all kinds of little tiny things that just cause trouble. And a lot of times you don't even know the trouble was there until you run some report weeks, months later and realize that something is amiss. So a lot of that trouble comes from moving data. So what are we seeing now? We're seeing more of a data federation approach. Leave the data where it is and find a way to access it. And we're going to find out in 1 second a really cool innovation that's helping us do all of that. So the point of this slide is that data does have gravity. You don't want to move it if you don't have to. And the other thing to remember, we talked about the thin pipes and how when those pipes are thin, we really had to strip out a lot of the context in order to get the data through the pipe into the warehouse such that we could structure it and analyze it and all that kind of fun stuff. Well, now you hear about things like object storage. You don't need to strip out all that context anymore. You can leave the context in the data where it resides and deal with it later. And there's this other cool concept called schema on read. So it used to be, again, you had to think through what your business analysts were going to ask, and that helped you understand the ideal schema for the data. Well, now you can just deposit the data in your data lake, as we call it these days, and then do schema on read. So you can change the lens through which you view the data to better understand it without having to strip out that context, because context is so important. It's always important to know the context of the data. And speaking of, what does that look like? For those of you old timers out there, that's a card catalog. That's what we used to have to do before Google came along and we could just Google things. We had to go down to the library, go to the card catalog, open up those drawers, finger through them, find something interesting. Aha, PR 1109, that's where this book is, and we go find the book. That's a lot of time to spend just trying to get to the nut, right? Well, dictionaries, business dictionaries are not new. We've had business dictionaries, metadata dictionaries, for example, definition dictionaries, etc., for data for many, many, many years. For 40 years or more, we've had these things, but they weren't very powerful. And typically they were offline, meaning they weren't actually baked into the processes of working with data. Well, now, thanks to the modern data stack, we have these catalogs that are tremendously powerful for helping organizations collaborate on learning what these technologies do, learning what this definition means, what's that definition, what's this table over here all about. If we can collaborate, and this is a big part of the modern data stack, if we can collaborate even in real time, then we can really get to the meat. We can really get to the crux of an issue that we're trying to address right now. So this is another big part, and I major hats off to a company called Google for something called Google Docs. We actually talked about the origin of that on DM Radio one time, a really fascinating story. But what happened there? Google somehow broadsided Microsoft and now owns the data management suite for the business, for your everyday activities. Microsoft Word, for example, was the old way. Now we do that in Google Docs, at least I do. Microsoft is still around. It's a powerful force, make no mistake about it. But this just kind of shows you the vector of innovation. Well, so these data catalogs are extremely important for helping us understand the data, make sense of all this stuff in the context so that we can leverage it. So moving right along, something else came out of Google, something called Kubernetes. The best way to describe Kubernetes is to say it's the operating system for the cloud. So Kubernetes, Google figured out that multi-cloud is reality. Multi-cloud is never going to go away. We're going to have multiple cloud platforms. We need some way to manage and orchestrate across all of that. That's what Kubernetes does. It's basically what they call distributed compute. So you can federate the compute. Well, that goes along very well with something called data federation. Remember, we don't want to have to move the data around all the time anymore. We want to leave it where it is and access it as we need to. So what's this all about? One last little teaser slide before I hand it off to my friends from Google and Looker. Serverless. Where did serverless come from? This is a fascinating concept. And again, we keep abstracting away as much as possible from the nitty-gritty, from the really technical, hard stuff to deal with. Serverless is extremely fast. It's extremely powerful, of course, if you do it correctly. But serverless is really one of the last most interesting aspects for the new modern data stack. And of course, like most people in the modern world, We're all working from home and schooling from home. You can see my Chief Operating Officer just stepped in here. But last slide for yours truly, what's old is new again. That's actually Newfoundland there. And the reason I bring this up is to say that data warehousing and business dictionaries, even artificial intelligence, are not really new. They've been around for a long time. In fact, there's something called an AI winter. If you look it up on the Google or on Wikipedia, AI winter referred to the period of time after which people got excited about artificial intelligence, but before there was any real tangible value from all that stuff. Well, I think the AI winter is done now, and we're in an AI warming period, let's just say. And with machine learning and automation and serverless, you combine all these things together, and you have the makings of the modern data stack. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Joel McKelvey. Joel, I'm going to hand you the keys to the castle. Take it away and tell us what you see for the modern data stack.
Great. So hopefully you can see now. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Eric, for that great introduction. I think this conversation today is a lot about the trends that you were talking about, Eric, and a lot of conversations about a mind shift or a change that we all need to, as data people, think about, a way of modernizing our approach to data a lot. And modernizing is a word I think that gets really overused. I think that semantically it's a little nebulous. But what I would say is when we say modernization, what we're really saying is a new way of thinking about how you handle data and how you handle analytics for better outcomes. And there's some newness here, right? There's some changes here. So hi, I'm Joel from the Looker team at Google Cloud. We have Bruno here also from the data and analytics team at Google Cloud. And we're going to just present a little bit about what we're hearing from the companies we talk to about data and analytics and some of the technology changes that are driving that difference, that modernization of thinking, which I think is really, really important as we go about building systems or modernizing the systems that we have. So first and foremost, the idea of this whole webinar is around supply and demand. And Bruno and I were talking about that a little bit offline as we were preparing for this. The idea of supply and demand is, from a modernization perspective, is that historically we've really thought about operations, about being a DBA, about building and managing data, about how we support getting the data to the point where it can be analyzed. And that has been technologically and operationally a very complex process. It is non-trivial. It is where most of us cut our teeth and got our experience. I suspect many of you on this call, that's where your expertise really lies. But one thing that we should note, and we can take away from some of these statistics, is that where data provides value to businesses that fund our jobs is not the operations side. It's on the innovation side, it's on the insights side. It really helps businesses in 2020 more than ever during the pandemic. It helps businesses compete better during times of disruption, helps them build and grow and maintain customer bases, sell more, be more successful, be more profitable, and generally move KPIs along as a company. And that's what we as data teams are asked to do. We're asked a lot more than just get the data into the warehouse, right? We're asked to really make a difference with data. And we absolutely can. With that, I want to hand over to Bruno here, and he's going to talk a little bit about trends he's seen, particularly on the database and the data and analytics space around why we focus more on operations than innovation and how we can get past that. So I'll hand it off to you, Bruno.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Joel, for the great introduction. And you guys have already set up this very well, talking about issues around multi-cloud and serverless and all the other issues that this audience is probably experiencing and how they're scaling and modernizing their environment. Hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll give you some best practices we've learned from customers. I'm more interested in hearing the questions that you have. So as you're listening to us, make sure that you prepare your questions. We want to hear what you're struggling with and maybe even some of the best and worst practices that you have. You know, why are we talking about modernizing our data stack? Well, for the simple reason that today we are not getting the value that we're supposed to get out of our data, right? I don't think it's any surprise to see that data is growing in unprecedented scale, and it's actually quite scary to think that Our data production is more than 10x in the last 8 years. 90% of the data in the world has been created just in the last 10 years. Yet, if you look at what we've been able to do with that data, it's pretty scary. Over 2/3 of the data that we have produced is actually never analyzed. And when you survey organizations across the world and you ask them, what do you think about the work that's been done with data? The answer is not a great one. Almost 70% of organizations, companies, are saying that they're not able to realize tangible and measurable value out of data. So that's why we're talking about how do we modernize our approach with the new challenges that we have. And so what I want to share with you today is some of the best practice that we learned with our customers. And let's start by going to the next slide so we can talk about what's holding us back. Hopefully you'll relate to these issues and maybe you have more that you want to share with us. But the first obvious one is this idea of complexity, right? Our environment has grown more and more complex. It has become more difficult for all of us to provide information that's relevant, actionable, and timely. I call that the RAT principle: relevant, actionable, and timely. Those are kind of the 3 key letters that you want to remember when you're delivering data at scale. And today, almost 90% of our analysts really struggle with outdated data. The second problem we have is we have inherited legacy systems and we have new ones. And the way we supply them, the way we operate them is really different. In the old way, we had vertical integration, where getting a vertical stack that's highly integrated is the way to get value. And we've seen the limitation of that. We're now switching to a world that's horizontal, that needs to be open. And now the question is, how do you marry these two metaphors to get value out to your end users? I mean, the reality here is that most employees, 90%, still complain that they can't trust and rely on their data because either the technology is not appropriate or the ownership inside the organization on who's supposed to solve that for them is not very clear. And on top of that, you can see it here, data executives like you, they're challenged with dealing with all this operational aspect of modernizing their stack, which you can call operation. Then they're pressured to innovate. So it's both operation and innovation that's at stake here. And 80% of the analytics work produced today is descriptive. So we are far from our potential of providing predictive, prescriptive analytics. The good news, as you can see here, is this is still the majority of the space. So don't feel like you're behind. A large portion of organizations are still wrestling with this. The question is, how can we help each other? And in fact, what we've learned from our customers, it requires you to flip the script, if you will. And so what does flipping the script mean? It means that for each of these dimensions that we talked about, if we go to the next slide, Joel, we want to operate a few things. Here's where we can help you at Google. The first one is turning this complex world into a flexible one. We know this as firsthand experience, and you know this as firsthand experience with Google today, to navigate the complex world of the internet with data that's changing rapidly, that's not really perhaps connected with each other. We're able to simplify that with one simple search bar. And so our mission is to make that reality happen in your own data environment. Now, how did we get to that search bar? Well, we're using a lot of the technology that's available commercially to you is technology we've been using. We've been using BigQuery for over 10 years. That's more than any of our cloud competitors can say about the use of their internal technology. We use Dataflow. If you don't know Dataflow, it's a fully managed streaming analytics service. We use it extensively. And we also look at analytics as a business critical problem where, in fact, BigQuery is 10 times more reliable than other technologies or competitors have in the market. So when you think about who is the partner that I'm going to go with to simplify my environment, think about your interaction with our technology as a consumer. The second piece on open, and Eric talked a little bit about this at the beginning, I think that's really particularly important on 2 dimensions. One is the openness. If you're in the technical audience, look at the work that's happening, the open source. When you look at, certainly from our standpoint, BigQuery is the externalized version of the internal Dremel technology, but we also heavily influence Apache Impala and Drill. When we talk about Dataflow, we contribute heavily to Apache Beam. So it is in our DNA to work in this open source and understand how the open source world works, and we believe that the more we contribute to those and the more we can provide services on top of them, the better your organization is going to be served. But there's also this idea that you're living in a multi-cloud world. And one of the things that makes me particularly proud when I look at what customers are doing in our technology is they look at Anthos, right, for application modernization and multi-cloud options there. On the data analytics side, we have recently announced a BigQuery Omni, which allows you now to bring the compute to your cloud. So you don't have to move data, just like Eric was saying, think about having to move this data where, in fact, your data is going to be everywhere. And so we're dedicated to making sure you can reach to those data sources and analyze them in a way that makes sense for your organization. And then finally, when I think about the level of maturity and being able to help you out with that, I think we might not get all the credit that we should in terms of understanding the end user. Obviously, with our investment with Looker, we are very focused on business analysts, but for many years, we've had great partnership with companies like Tableau. We've got a great open system that allows us to create direct API calls into our data analytics platform. And if you have not seen some of the recent announcements we've made with products like Data Q&A, which is a natural language processing option, allows you to basically talk to your data in a way. And also Connected Sheets, which, as many of you know and probably using today, you're using a great Google Sheet software to run your numbers. Well, now with Connected Sheets, you can do that live on BigQuery and then query a limited amount of data at a very fast speed. So we worry about each of these audiences, and I think that's what you want to think about when you're modernizing your data environment. Don't think about just modernizing the technology. Think about modernizing your approach and how you are serving the overall community inside your organization, the data engineers, the business analysts, and the information workers who need to be able to get more value out of their data. Now, we're shipping these products as a result of talking to our customers. And if you look at why our customers are choosing Google, there's a lot of great reference that's publicly available. Joel, if you go to the next slide, we'll be able to share who these customers are. And I won't talk much about them, but I want to talk about one example here, the Home Depot. You look at what Rick at the Home Depot has done. It really is an amazing transformation of modernizing their data environment from a traditional environment, Teradata, to BigQuery, aggregating data across hundreds of applications, going from a batch world to a real-time world. And more importantly, now that this data environment is available, what is he doing? Well, it's increasing the predictive accuracy using embedded machine learning by a factor of 2x. And that's what we talk about when we think about value. Is it's not just the technology stack, it's not just moving to the cloud, it's also taking advantage and changing the way you do your business so you can move faster and outperform your competition. Now, if we've learned from these customers, what have they done? What is common to all of them? This next slide here, and you can build all the animations, Joel, has a few things in common. Hopefully, this is a checklist you can use at your company as you're thinking about the process of modernizing. The first one is the obvious one I talked about earlier. It's about storing data at an unprecedented scale without the unprecedented cost, right? So that's being able to manage that. I want to have all the data, just like Eric was saying before. I want to have the data without having to think about the questions people are going to ask, right? We're in this world now where you want to store all the data and worry about the questions later. In the past, we had to think about the questions and reduce our potential on day one. No longer the case here. And we know traditional enterprise data warehouse cannot accommodate that. Cloud data warehouse can do that now. These companies are switching from a world where it's batch to a world of real-time, but augmented real-time. And so what I mean by that is in the process of bringing data, preparing it automatically, completing it automatically, protecting it automatically, so you can get data in faster that's of higher quality. They also believe in an open infrastructure. As I talked about earlier, this data needs to be consumed from all types of interfaces. We are going to talk about dashboards in a little bit, but you have to think about dashboard is one of the many ways that people are going to consume the information. You want something that's open enough so you can call with APIs, you can embed it into applications. Fourth is they want intelligence to be built in. Like if you look at the evolution of artificial intelligence today, and I think over the next 10 years, AI and BI are going to converge, it's because we've kind of treated artificial intelligence the second thing, this thing you bolt on top of the architecture. But what we believe is that it's something that needs to be brought in day one. And like yesterday, I was looking at one of our blogs on the connected sheet side, this idea of smart fills, the ability for the application to know, oh, you're filling in this, let me suggest to you. And augmentation works both ways, where the machine can augment the human capabilities, but the humans can also augment the machine capabilities with their ability to judge. And so building that into your design when you build a solution is important. And then finally, and I know Joel will talk a little bit about that, data consumption through the multiple factors, the data scientists, but also the consumers that we're all becoming is an important design to think about. And so I hope that you'll have some questions and best practices around that, or maybe tough questions for us to drill into some of these technologies later on today. But Joel, I'm going to hand it over back to you.
Great, thanks, Bruno. I appreciate it. So I just want to build on what Bruno said. We have a great facility here for you to ask questions of myself or Bruno or Eric. Make them hard. We like them. And it's the best way for us all to learn from each other. So please enter them into the system as we go. Bruno, I also really liked what you were saying about openness and compatibility. I think we often conflate openness with open source. And I think really what I've seen, particularly since Looker has become a part of Google Cloud, is this willingness to interoperate with a larger data ecosystem that is just really how we're all working these days in a multi-cloud environment with our infrastructure distributed across multiple providers. So one of the things we're talking about is the supply versus demand, this operations versus innovation perspective. And Bruno mentioned some of the ways in which Google Cloud is working hard on simplifying the operational side. But right now we're still very stuck, and I think rightly so. A lot of us spend a lot of our time on ETL, on things like database administration, around picking the tools on the back end of the system before it gets to people. So we tend to focus first on that, on the data, on how we use the data, and then secondarily on what's the technology we use for sharing that data. And then last, and unfortunately frequently least, we focus on the people who need to connect data, right? For shorthand, we'll call it the customer for the data experience, or what we as data team view as our users or customers. And it's a bit lopsided, right? Because data only really has value when it can get to people in the right place, where and when they need it, so that it can have impact on the business. And it's not that we're all making bad decisions. I want to be very clear here. We're not sitting in this data location in this little chart of 3 bumps here because we're fish or because we don't know what we're doing. Historically, we've said because the technology has not existed to make that easy, to smooth those operations, to make it simple. And that's part of the change that has happened in the technology that fundamentally causes us to modernize. We have seen a sea change in that functionality that makes our lives a lot easier. So then what do we do? So let's talk about business intelligence, which is the words we use to describe kind of people consuming data traditionally in a business. Really, to be effective at it, you have to think about who's going to consume that data, why they need it, and when they need it. And historically, what we have said is, let's build reports, let's build dashboards, let's put them in front of people where and when they need them. Great, and it is very, very powerful. But it can be a challenge in the old world of technology, just getting the data, which is increasingly in machine scale rather than scale, doing some form of processing of it to put it in front of humans so that they can make better decisions. And the other thing is, and Eric spoke a little bit about this, about gravity or distribution of data, it's how do we get consolidated view of data? How do we align the data assets? How do we consolidate, combine, join the data assets in such a way that we can really deliver the value that people need? It's not enough for us to give the marketing department marketing data and the sales department sales data and the finance department finance data, because those 3 entities are interwoven. They all need each other's data to make the right decisions. The world of building a data mart for just marketing or operational data stores has gone away because people need more types of data and more consolidated. And this is how people are consuming data today. People are consuming data very much like consumers. We all have phones. Many of us have computers at home. Hopefully, at this point in the time of COVID, a lot of us are working from home. We're used to this online digital lifestyle, and the information workers, or even workers on a manufacturing line, are used to having data at their fingertips, and they're used to having fresh, accurate, trustworthy, useful data where and when it's needed. And so the challenge here is, how do we as an industry, how do we as a discipline shift our thinking from getting data to the data warehouse and start freeing up time and brain space to focus on getting data from that point of consolidation at the data warehouse to the user in the place where it can have the greatest impact? So part of our challenge here is data infrastructure can be complex. I don't want to beat a dead horse. This is actually a pretty simple slide, given the complexity of most of our data environments. Certainly the Looker data environment, the Google Cloud data environment is far more complex than this. But this should look familiar to a lot of us, right? That data is sort of collected on the left and consumed on the right, or it is, this is the life cycle of data from where it's born to where it's consumed, right? And it comes in from a lot of sources that are all over the place. There's some form of ingestion and processing, and then we tend to stage it into something like a data lake. A transaction-based data lake is a very common place where you might do some heavy ETL as well. And then going from that data lake into a data warehouse where it can be analyzed, and then maybe going from there into an aggregate or a cube or a data mart or or whatever you want to call it as that next step before it gets analyzed. And I think there's an important point here that every step of this process could have data transformation and aggregation in it. And where that transformation and aggregation occurs, it occurs because you are concerned about the capacity and performance of the next step. The perfect environment for this would be for you to be able to take those data sources and make them analyzable by the people on the analytics side on the other side, without having to go through aggregation, extraction, and consolidation. You want true Kandelian granularity at the point of analysis. You don't want to lose granularity. As Eric said, you don't want to lose context. When you're doing analysis, you want all that at your fingertips. But we've constantly sort of narrowed this. It's not as much a pipeline as it's been a funnel, because it's hard to manage a data warehouse. It's very easy to blow one up by putting too much data in it or having too many concurrent connections. A data lake can be super messy and very expensive, and so you put it in something cheap and deep, but then you can't analyze it with any performance level, right? And you extract because analytics tools hitting the warehouse tend to bring it offline when there's too many people doing it, right? This is all about babying the technology because it hadn't reached a mature state. And we've now really reached a new in the data warehouse, data lake, data store world, where this is not 3 things or 4 things anymore. It's one thing. Bruno, I know you've heard the term lake house for data. I'm not a particular fan of it myself, but data lake house is something we hear now. There are in the cloud massively parallel processing databases where you simply move the data and the schema exists. And Eric, you touched on this earlier. You move the data in and you can perform the analysis. You transform on query, you schema at query time, and you now have access to real granular data. So while I say data structure can be complex as a relatively simple slide, the reality is that it can be far simpler than this. And that frees up time. It frees up operational resources, and it keeps us as data teams from doing sort of the same boring task over, and lets us focus on things that are going to have a greater impact. So with cool new tools like BigQuery, right, you can drop all of your data effectively into BigQuery or into a cloud storage bucket. It's accessible there for querying. And that is a functionally no ops type of an environment where you don't have to be the DBA. You don't have to spend a ton of time on automated pipelines to get the data in. It just goes in, and now it's accessible. And that frees up your thought process to thinking about things like governance, accessibility, freshness, optimization, all the things that you need to do with data to extract that value. And that's why we're a part of Google Cloud now, is there's a sort of natural fit between a massively parallel processing data lake / warehouse and a tool that can then make the data that's there accessible to people where and when they need it, so it can have as big an impact as possible. So here's the slide for a 2-second pitch on why Looker is super cool. I'm not going to beat this one to death here, but Looker is a very different way of doing analytics. If you're used to something that's like a workbook analytics system where you extract or cube something and then you put it on your desktop and you start working with it. This is all in database, where queries are run by the database's query engine itself. So what this lets you do is capture the value of that database. So if you've got something like BigQuery or another cloud massively parallel processing database, you can leverage its capabilities as part of your analytics system. Your analytics system doesn't have to be as massively scalable as BigQuery is. It can rely on the power of BigQuery. And there's a lot of things you get with that when you start communicating with innovative database vendors, including things like BigQuery machine learning, where you can just operationalize machine learning very easily inside Looker. So leveraging your modern database is a really important part of what Looker does as part of that modern data stack. And that's part of what we should be thinking about as data teams. We should be thinking about, if I can reduce operational overhead, if I can automate that system and get the data in there, now what are the new things I can do? Is it machine learning? Is it natural language processing, as Bruno mentioned earlier? Is it new ways of getting data in front of users, in front of customers, so that they can really use it to make a difference? And that's where Looker shines. We are also, and I think it's important, as Bruno pointed out, for us to talk about the fact that we are very cloud and database agnostic in the Looker space. I've mentioned a lot about BigQuery, but not only can we connect to essentially any modern database that you have, on-prem or off-prem, Looker has the capability to form connections to multiple databases. So we can perform analysis on one cloud or another cloud, and then aggregate the query results right there for you so you can see them together. So for a lot of people who might have a distributed environment, let's say you have marketplace data in one common vendor's data storage bucket, maybe you have ads data in another cloud vendor's storage bucket. As long as those storage buckets are accessible by a modern and speak SQL, Looker can go in and do the analysis of that data. And that's across cloud and including your own private cloud or something on premise. And that is, that's a really innovative and new way of thinking about data and analytics. So let me focus a little now on what we call data experiences. This might be somewhat of a new term, but I feel it's pretty marketing-y, so my apologies, but because I know we have a pretty technical audience. But you can think of how people experience data as all the ways they might consume, use, or expect data in their day-to-day life or their day-to-day job. And we really have, as an industry, we've really thought about reports and dashboards. And with Looker and with Google Cloud, you can build reports and dashboards. I'm telling you, we can do good ones. They're solid, and you can have a real impact with it. If your CEO needs regular, frequent updates of a dashboard, you can automate not just the pipeline, but also the analysis, the delivery of that via their chat application right into his or her inbox. In email, or however you want to do that, text them when the time comes that there's a new report available. Super easy, super automatable within Looker with that back end of the larger Google Cloud. What I would say is that traditional way reporting and dashboarding is table stakes for our users, for our consumers these days. There are a lot more ways that it makes sense to put data into the hands of people who need it. And that starts with data discovery and exploration. Right now, we see a lot of analytics being done ad hoc in Google Sheets or Excel or elsewhere. But Looker has a really useful data discovery and exploration interface. And we're working closely with things like this Smart Sheets capability and elsewhere. Think of it as the way that people get more out of their data. And if you've been on a data team before and you've built a report that answers a question and then gotten a call immediately after that says, I like that, that was good, thank you, I have another question now, and you've had to deal with that second question, you understand how important it is to provide data exploration capabilities to people who want to consume it. So modern business intelligence, as we talk about business intelligence strictly, it has a reporting and dashboarding function as well as scheduling and data delivery and that sort of aspect. But it also has this really trusted exploration ability. We really need to be able to provide the ability of people to ask and answer their own questions in real time without the data team being a boat anchor that slows them down. And this also operationally frees you up as a data team. This gives you more resources to focus on things like innovation, machine learning, any one of the new areas that you work with data. And some of those are really, really interesting. When you free up resources, when you free it up by modernizing the stack, building this modern data lake, data warehouse, simplifying the data pipeline and automating it, simplifying and providing self-service reporting and dashboarding to your consumers, to your users, there are new ways that we can put data in front of people that are going to make a real difference. The first one I would, we talk to a lot of teams that are doing this. The first one we call integrated insights. So this would be, let's say you have a CRM application, but you want to surface data from outside the CRM application to, let's say, sales teams who use that as their primary workflow, right? They're right there in that tool. Well, with Looker, we can do that. We can embed charts. We can embed insights from the marketing department. We can embed financial insights right inside, say, SFDC, right inside Salesforce. So the sales team, as they go through that tool, they look at it and they have the data right at their fingertips. There's no need then for them to exit out of the tool to find another tool, no matter how useful and easy to use it is, like Looker or Sheets or whatever. There's no need for them to interrupt that train of thought or the way that they're working to get the data they need. And this is just one of the things that you can free up when you have a little more resource to think about how people consume. Now, there's another one around workflows themselves that are fully data-driven. I was working recently with a company that does deliveries, and by the very nature of deliveries, they need to know who to deliver to, and they tend to be in vehicles. And they were using Looker to and some natural language. Who are the top 5 people who I need to call on today? How do I know how to deliver to? Who do I need to deliver to? And then the system would read back to them, audio read back to them, where their next deliveries are, who they need to deliver to next. So that made a real difference for this organization, and that's a workflow that's really right around data. It's inherent. The data is key and central to how they work, and that data-driven workflow really couldn't work without a modern infrastructure. Again, that's another thing you can free up to do. And then even a modern data-driven application. If you've got a retail organization, you have their app on your phone and you buy from them and you want to go back and look at previous purchases. That retailer is giving you data, maybe giving you charts, maybe giving you query results right there in the app on your mobile device. That application can be built with a Looker and Google Cloud backend to deliver that data. And that can really, again, have a strong impact in the marketability of your product. Maybe your application becomes more popular, allows you to monetize your data as well. So that's a lot. talking about those individual experiences. But that's my challenge for you when we start thinking about a modern data stack, because the real key of the modern data stack is it's freeing you up. It's freeing up operational resources to focus on innovation. It's freeing up the data supply operations. So now you can start thinking about the demand for data and how you meet it as effectively as possible. And that's about your users. Excuse me, it doesn't seem to be, Eric, it doesn't seem to be progressing my slides. Oh, just magically did. Okay, well, there you go. Yeah, the wonders of online webinars these in the time of COVID. So just to bring it all together here, as we sort of round this out, and again, please ask questions as we go through. I know we have some in here. We'd be happy to answer them, and we look forward to it. Once you have simplified how you centralize and provide access to data, you have the governance, control, and delivery of it with a tool like Looker, with a tool like BigQuery. Now you can unlock unlimited experiences to drive value. So yes, you can modernize BI and analytics, but you can think beyond BI and analytics. How do you integrate insights? How do you integrate analytics into existing tools? How do you modify or improve workflows around analytics? Are you building data-based, data-driven applications? How do you monetize your data? How do you make your data that valuable part of how everybody works every day? So that's the challenge of modernizing the data stack. Just to sort of wrap it up, it's that change between supply and demand. We should be thinking about why people want data, the demand side, and working to operationalize and reduce the operations around supply so we can really focus on getting the value out the end.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so let me just kind of dive in here. I think you have one more slide you want to walk through, but and you were just kind of hinting at this. And folks, we may not get to all these questions because there are quite a few of them, but here's a really good question from one attendee asking, is there a replacement for traditional multidimensional OLAP so that we can make the data easier to access for multiple tools, including artificial intelligence? And that's really an interesting point baked into that question, which is these days, it's not just people who are using this data, it's systems, it's artificial intelligence, it's other forms of automation that sit on top of this to create what you're talking about as a data experience. So Bruno or Joel, can you tackle that real quick?
Well, I can answer it in the Looker context if you'd like, Bruno. Yeah, so Looker has a user group permissions access functionality built in. And it can inherit from one of two directions, access controls for the data. If your database has controls, users, groups, and permissioning on it, we can inherit from the database, but we can also inherit directly from a corporate-wide permissioning user group and role system. So essentially, you'll need an OLAP system, but with that, Looker will be compatible, and we can import those rights and restrictions as necessary, and then provide access. We also have a really comprehensive API, so that will also help third-party systems connect to the data. And then Looker provides something we call Looker Actions, and Looker Actions are essentially pre-built API calls out to third-party systems. So for example, if you want the results of a Looker query to be dumped into Google Cloud Storage or an S3 bucket, we have actions for that, and you can just have Looker do that at the end of the query time. We can deliver data into the Google marketing platform, into GMP. We can connect into email systems, texting systems, and we have some of that pre-built into the product so that you can deliver reports right to people where they need it. Slack integration, for example, so that and a Slack bot, so you can ask questions of Looker right inside Slack. So lots of options there. It has to do with that whole idea of openness and interoperability. But yes, permissions and control are a huge part of that. One of the nice things about Looker is you can audit who's accessing what and be very, very granular, and that includes third-party systems.
That's great. That's a fantastic answer. And you know, there's another question here that really gets pretty deep. And we talked a bit about data catalogs. We talked about context. but there's this whole concept of semantics, right? And I think, Joel, you even had a comment about that earlier. And one of the attendees is asking, what is the framework in technology for open, flexible, and universal semantics? So can you kind of talk about the importance of understanding semantics and how that gets woven into an information landscape?
Yeah, and that is an ongoing challenge with everyone, right? The way we so Looker has a semantic layer built in, right, for modeling both data and queries called the LookML, the Looker modeling language, which shouldn't be much of a surprise. And it is a centralized place where you can define those types of semantics very clearly and easily. It is a true IDE from a model development perspective, so you can inherit and share and develop complex workflows around how you build out models, how you build out queries, and how you develop the entire semantic layer. As far as that semantic layer's utility outside of Looker, that's part of why we have the APIs. But I think what you would find with the Looker semantic layer as defined in LookML is that it is extremely sophisticated. It can be pretty easy to use, but you can also get very deep into it and be integrated with things like Git and elsewhere so that you can track, share, and reuse the semantic layer as necessary, which I think was the missing part. Back when we were all writing SQL, boy, you know, we're saving snippets and text files and trying to hunt through stuff. And when you look at semantic layer, when you look at model development, there is a history of essentially using SQL, which is not really a programming language, right? It's a query language, but we try and use it like a programming language. And what Looker and Looker's semantic layer, LookML, has tried to do is take the tools of software development and put them in the model developer's hands, to take the tools of software development like an IDE, like Git integration, and put them in the hands of people who are trying to build out semantic layers. And that's the power of Looker.
If I can add to this, because the topic of semantic layer is an important one. I mean, across the entire 30 years of business intelligence, having a strong set of semantics that's reusable across and also is secure is an important problem. It's one that actually has not been solved horizontally very well, right? It's what I was referring to earlier in value through vertical integration. And so I think when you look at options like LookML, what you'll find is, one, it's very modern, right? So it's a modern way to think about building your semantics, which you got to challenge kind of the old ways and the closed ways of building semantics. And then second, you want to add additional capabilities coming from your catalogs, for instance, and you want to look for places of automation. I'll give you just one example. Within 3 seconds of data hitting BigQuery, our data catalog technology will pick it up and start the process of profiling the data. So you want to look at places where, one, you have an open, modern way like LookML to build a set of semantics, and you want to enrich that with augmented technologies around data catalogs so you can effectively have a good view into your data across the organization. It's really important. Lots of, data catalog is one of those things that people don't talk about a lot because it's not that sexy, but it's actually is the foundation of everything else you do above, such as building a reliable semantic layer. So I would look at LookML and look at data catalog for that.
Yeah, that's a great answer, guys. And there's another question which I think is perfect for teeing up what you were just closing with, Joel, and I'll kind of read it out, and it really speaks to a big question in my mind as well. And I'll just couch this very quickly. If you think about the history of business intelligence and analytics, you even referenced dashboards, Bruno, and those are all very useful tools for seeing into the world of data and understanding what's happening. You bake in your key metrics, for example, or your OKRs, right? We talk about OKRs these days. That's all well and good, but what you want to do is operationalize this stuff. And that's what you talk about when you're referring to data experiences, for example. So the question from the audience member just says, please talk about how to integrate the use of data between the operational transactional world and the business intelligence world, especially, and I love this point, especially when you consider in the operational world, companies often tend to buy and not build systems. And so APIs come into play here, obviously, but talk about how data experiences really in many ways are coming full circle and allowing us to leverage the power of analysis, the power of data in operational systems when things happen. Joel, first you, and then maybe Bruno.
Yeah, so I can give a couple of examples, which is, I think, probably where this best lies of how people have operationalized. We have a customer that's doing a lot of online marketing and is buying things like AdWords and stuff like that, and bidding for them in a relatively aggressive market, right? Like there's a lot of people out there trying to do the same sort of thing. And what they've done is they have the ability now through Looker, they've built the system such that they can track how effective each campaign they purchase, each campaign they execute, how effective it is. And then they automated turning off or on the purchase of those ads right from within Looker. So they can go in and they can see, oh, this is doing well, this isn't, this is doing well, this isn't, and turn off the ones that aren't. But more importantly, they don't have to be there to turn them off, right? Or necessarily have to even be there to turn them on. And that's calling those external APIs. So that's using analysis of near real-time data to review results and make relatively simple but automated decisions against the analytic results. And that is operationalization of those results just right away. Now, another good example is the use of mobile devices and texting inside Looker. We have the ability to, we have integrations and the capability to text, say, a customer when they've abandoned a shopping cart for a retailer. I know one retailer is closely tracking both purchase habits and abandoned shopping carts. In the event of abandoned shopping cart, go in and Looker and push that user a text with a discount code. Say, hey, we see that you were shopping for X. We actually pre-build the entire communication inside Looker. We see that you're shopping for X. We think it's a great fit. Here's a discount code if you want another 30% off of that. And they're able to capture a ton of those discount codes. Now, and then the third example I'll use is one that was on one of Bruno's slides, which is a company called Diamond Resorts and Hospitality in the time of COVID. They obviously saw some changes in their business due to the fact that everyone is on lockdown, and they're looking for places and times to reopen parts of their resort systems where it's safe, obviously, because their customers' safety is paramount. So how do they do that? They're combining their own customer data with the data that they get from the health organizations and some of the free data sets which are hosted on Google Cloud. And they're combining it with demographic data and weather data. And they've built a metric which allows them to quickly operationalize what is the percentage chance of us opening Resort X in the next 2 weeks or in the next 3 months. And that is hugely powerful for their business. Their business will live or die based on those types of metrics. And that's a way that they are operationalizing the bottom line of their business with Looker and Google Cloud.
Yeah. This question of operationalizing analytics and AI is an important one, because we could be talking about solutions here in the ether, but the reality is you're going to get value once it actually is applied. And so, what is the best way to apply it? You know, I joke. I said the definition of artificial intelligence is not, or the acronym AI, it doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. It stands for applied and invisible. That's how you know that actually the machine is working for you, is because you don't see it. It's kind of the way you think about the iPhone, right? The best UI or the best UX is the one that you don't see, is when things are occurring because they're just being automated. I think the big trend that you're going to see, and this is something that I think data and analytics leaders need to embrace, is the way analytics is being consumed is switching from the world of the specialist, the data analyst. And we've done a great job making self-service tools available to them, but we're just really been scratching the surface. The future is going to be about these rich data experiences where they're already embedded in the workflow of what your consumers are doing. You know, I think about a retailer in Australia right now that has built an intelligent digital assistant where basically you're opening Google Maps, and you're able to talk to it and in real time assess the inventory of that retailer, in real time tell you if it's available and in what aisle, right? So that's how you ultimately operationalize the data analytics stack that you have, is you just make it disappear into the workflow of your users. These users are not data analysts. They don't think in rows and columns, and they don't think in dashboards. They think into, well, I'm looking for this particular problem at this moment, and how can the infrastructure help them solve it? So I think, we have a lot of work to do there, but I think a lot of it is start from the consumer and start realizing that you're not serving specialists anymore. You're serving hundreds, thousands of people that will never touch a dashboard.
Yeah, what a great way to close out too, folks. We got a bunch of questions here. I'll pass them along to our presenters today. But what a great example at that very end, Bruno, because what you just referenced, being able to have that conversation with the AI assistant that has access to the inventory, and not only that, but knows which aisle that product is in. All of a sudden, you've solved a huge challenge, and there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes to make that happen. But to the end user, it's just seamless and runs and does what it needs to do, and you can get home to your kids and your family or whatever. That's the power of automation. That's the power of intelligent automation. I love the way you talk about that. What was it? Analytics applied or advanced and invisible? What was it?
Yeah, it doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. It's applied and invisible. It goes back to what you talked about earlier. This idea of impact. I always say, analytics are most powerful when you tell me something I don't know, and it's even better when you tell me something about me that I don't know. And it's kind of the same thing, that retail example, is that you're telling me where it is in the store, if it's available, how I get to it. Those are things, I can't even imagine you'd be able to tell me that. Now, of course, operationalizing a supply chain of analytics for that is not trivial, but at least you get to start with that use case instead of, oh, they'll go into a dashboard, and so that's no longer what's going to happen. The demands are too high.
Right. Well, we closed the circuit is what we did, right? We've talked about this for years, and I kind of even hinted at that at the top of the hour here, is that there's this vision of where we're going, but we're finally there. Or at least we're a lot further than we were. The cloud is a big part of that. Artificial intelligence is a big part of that. Really closing the circuit is what has allowed us to get tremendous value. Well, folks, this is the first part of our two-part series. Watch for the next one coming up in December on data experiences. Big thank you to the folks from Looker, Joel, Bruno. You guys are fantastic. Thanks for your time. We'll catch up to you next time, folks. We do archive all these webinars. You can come back anytime and watch it. The archive is usually available within about an hour. So feel free to share that with your friends and colleagues. And with that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks. We'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.